Somewhere lost in the clouded annals of history lies a place that few have seen. A mysterious place called the Unknown, where long-forgotten stories are revealed to those who traveled through the wood. That is the opening narration to Over the Garden Wall, one of my favorite Halloween and fall shows to watch every year. If you haven't heard of it before, I'm happy to introduce you. And if you have, I hope you love it as much as I do, because this video is all about it if you can't tell. Over the Garden Wall is a show about two brothers getting lost in the woods and winding up in the unknown, a strangely familiar yet otherworldly place. They don't know how they got there, but they do know one thing. They want to go home. Along their journey home, they encounter many strange people, places, and a few creatures. Who doesn't love a good creature every now and then? This year is Over the Garden Wall's 10th anniversary, as the show originally aired on November 3rd in 2014. You may hear November 3rd and think, wait, this is a Halloween show, right? You watch it every year at Halloween. And yeah, it is a Halloween show, they just missed the mark by a few days. No one's perfect, and it works perfectly as a fall show too, but So in honor of the upcoming 10th anniversary, my love for this show and just generally wanting to talk about it, today we're going to explore the unknown and Over the Garden Wall. We're going to talk about its world, the two brothers lost inside of it, and what it all means. I'm also going to tell you why the vibes of this show are immaculate, how it's basically a modern fairy tale, and how the creator was inspired by Breaking Bad of all things when working on it. And no, that isn't a joke, and no, I'm not making it up. Please believe me, I promise I'm telling the truth.
Holy Mother of God!
Anyway, let's hop on a train together and ride off into the unknown. To start us off, Wirt and Gregory have wandered into the unknown. It's where the entire show takes place, but it's never given an exact location. Wirt and Gregory don't seem to be from the unknown, at least from what we can tell, as their goal is to get home. This is established pretty quickly in episode 1.
What are we doing out here?
We're walking home.
They also don't know much about the unknown and the way it works, so as they find out things, so do we as the audience. In episode 1, The Grist Mill, we found out a few things about the unknown. First, there are birds that can talk. There are scary trees with faces on them. These are called Edelwood trees. And there are monsters, or at least things that can become monsters. See, there's this big terrifying wolf creature that has
beautiful eyes.
And it's actually a dog that swallowed this little black turtle, which seemingly transformed it into this horrific creature. Sadly, Wirt and Greg's exploits in this episode end up destroying the episode's titular grist mill, which the woodsman, a character they met who had planned to help them, was using to make fuel for his lantern with the earlier mentioned scary face trees. This might all seem kind of random, but I promise it's important. Besides establishing a lot of things about the unknown in this episode, we also learn a lot about our protagonists because the writing in Over the Garden Wall is really good and they just kind of act how they are. They don't have to tell us. That, of course, goes hand in hand with the animation. I can just show you these few seconds without even playing you the audio, and you can learn a lot about these characters just by the way they act, the facial expressions they make, and the way they move. Wirt is an overthinking young man prone to nervousness.
Do you think it's some kind of deranged lunatic with an axe waiting out there in the darkness for innocent victims?
He's indecisive and almost comes off as cowardly, leaving his brother behind during a few moments in this first episode, and even blaming him for all of the destruction that happens, even though it's not completely his fault.
You're always messing up, Greg.
Greg is naive and overly optimistic, and while his naivety does cause trouble at times, to say he's to blame for everything would be a bit silly. Sure, he placed the candy on the turtle that the dog ate and caused it to transform and then left a trail right to them, but how was he supposed to know that that turtle causes dogs to transform into monsters and that that would lead the monster to them? Like, they don't know anything about this place. And Wirt should have been watching him. He's a kid. He's a little kid.
It's your brother.
Huh?
You are the elder child. You are responsible for you and your brother's actions.
Oh, and I forgot to mention their frog, whose name is currently Kitty or Wirt. They change his name a lot throughout the series. He's also important. And Gregory's Rock Fact Rock. Like, comment, and subscribe for rock facts. The episode ends with the woodsman sending them away, seemingly distraught that the abandoned mill he'd found had been destroyed, warning them one more time to
beware the unknown.
He also warned them about the beast, which wasn't the dog.
The dog? That is not the beast. He stalks like the night. He sings like the four winds. He is the death of hope.
But that doesn't seem all that important right now, right?
Fear the beast and leave these woods if you can.
I wanted to talk about the first 2 episodes in such detail because I think they lay out something Over the Garden Wall does really well. You see, the first episode introduced us to a lot of things that are going to be important to the core story overall. Who Wirt and Gregory are, the fact that they're lost in the unknown and want to get home, that this world is dangerous and seemingly magical in some way, the woodsman, the concept of the beast, etc., etc. But not every episode heavily develops the core story in that same way. In fact, episode 2 is a great example of that in that it doesn't deal with any of the major plot points set up from the first episode, but instead focuses on developing our understanding of the unknown more broadly, while also continuing Wirt and Greg's journey home and developing them as characters as well. There is continuity between episodes though, which is obviously important. Episode 2 begins similar to the first. Wirt and Greg wander through the woods looking for the town the woodsman told them to find.
It's almost morning. We should have found a town by now. This is the way the woodsman told us to go, right?
Or a town, a non-specific town. Along the way, they encounter the talking bird from the previous episode, who we find out is named Beatrice. Greg naively helps her from a bush, thinking she's magic, and she becomes very insistent that she now owes them a life debt. It's pretty obvious that she's trying to do something nefarious as she tries to get Greg away from Wirt.
How about you and I ditch your brother? Maybe later.
But he's pretty loyal to his older brother, or just not paying enough attention.
So is it nice being a bird? Nope.
Wirt, Gregory, and now Beatrice wander into a seemingly empty town called Pottsfield, only to find that most of the townsfolk are celebrating the harvest in a barn dressed up with hay and pumpkins. Things quickly go south as the two admit that they want to leave town and accidentally smashed a few pumpkins on the way in, also trespassing on the celebrations, obviously.
It saddens me that you don't wish to stay here with us, because I simply have to punish you for your transgressions.
What seems dire quickly becomes incredibly relaxing, as the two are sentenced to
a few hours of manual labor.
Wait, what? Really? That's it?
What follows is a roughly 40-second montage with some of the fantastic music that is featured throughout the series, before they again become scared of the townsfolk after finding skeletons in the holes they'd been asked to dig.
You're digging our own.
Nothing to worry about though, as the skeletons are actually alive and they were just digging them up to join the celebration. Yep, the entire town is made up of dead people, specifically skeletons. Fun fact, a potter's field was a term used in the 19th and early 20th century to describe a sort of mass grave, usually for unknown people, the poor, or criminals. So yeah, Pottsfield, Potter's Field, you get the picture I think. Based and dead-pilled. Besides the conflict of the people with Potter's Field, one of the other main conflicts of the episode is whether Wirt wants to trust Beatrice or not to help get them home, and by the end he decides to because she at least knows more about the unknown than him and Gregory do, even though she is a bit sus. So they decide to follow Beatrice to Adelaide of the Pasture, the good woman of the woods, and that is their new set goal from this point on. But getting there wasn't the meat of the episode, really. While there was that plot development, this episode wanted to show us more about the unknown through our main character's involvement, and that is what got us to that point. First, it's roughly harvest season. Second, the dead can live in the unknown. In fact, it's even implied that you come to Pottsfield when you die.
Sure you want to leave?
Me? Yes.
Oh well, you'll join us someday.
Whether that's just if you live in the unknown or not, we don't know. Maybe you have to be a skeleton. I've got no bone to pick with episode 2 though. In fact, a lot of people I've shown the show end up picking it as their favorite episode. Why is that? Well, as I said earlier, the vibes are immaculate. I'll probably end up saying that a lot throughout the video because it's an easy way to say, Over the Garden Wall's combined artistic choices create a pleasurable sensory experience while also investing us in the world being explored by the creators through their art forms. Everything in the show feels so specifically hand-picked and cared for. The beautiful folkish music that plays throughout, relaxing and yet melancholy as you listen to it.
Patient is the night.
The beautiful fall colors that make up the backdrops, which are, by the way, hand-drawn and hand-painted. This is an anecdote from the Over the Garden Wall art book that is shared a lot, but the art style of the show was heavily inspired by old Halloween postcards, among a ton of old cartoons and illustrations from the 19th and 20th century, from the illustrations of Gustave Doré for Don Quixote, The Tinderbox by Hans Christian Andersen, and much, much more. This was done purposefully, of course, I think in part because Patrick Macleod just liked those kinds of things, but also because he wanted to create something that felt old but new, which I personally think he accomplished. One such way of doing this was by combining the relatively modern style of animation and character designs with older styles. Wirt and Greg both look like they come out of a modern 2010s Cartoon Network cartoon, but they have splashes of old sentiments and style to their costumes, and things like their noses. Many of the animals in the show also look like they'd pop right out of an old storybook, especially this cat, which looks like one of those old school Halloween cats. Or the animals from episode 3, Schooltown Follies, which look like they'd come from a Busy Town book. The Over the Garden Wall wiki also mentions that they could have been inspired by the illustrations of Beatrice Potter, which yeah, I definitely see it. Also, before we move on, I wanted to point out how the pictures from around the intro title card are representative of the different episode titles, which is really cool, and I didn't have anywhere else to put that, so here it is. It's stuff like this that does give Over the Garden Wall this lovely but strange feeling. As I said earlier in the video, it feels familiar but otherworldly, not only in the world they're actually in, but also the cartoon itself. Old but new. Wirt, yet also Jason Funderburker. You'll get that joke by the end of the video, I promise. So that's how Over the Garden Wall balances out as a series. With that, you can tell that the show is just as much about the unknown itself as it is about Wirt and Gregory's adventure through it. Speaking of Wirt and Gregory's adventure through it, the show is only 10 episodes long. It's a miniseries, remember? So the journey isn't very long. Actually, altogether, the show is about an hour and 50 minutes long, which means it's about as long as a movie. Great to take in one sitting. But a lot more happens in that hour and 50 minute long time than we've talked about so far, so we're going to continue exploring it now. As I've said many times at this point, we learn a lot about Wirt and Gregory as they make their way home, as well as the unknown. Wirt and Gregory are brothers, half-brothers to be specific. Wirt has a bit of a chip on his shoulder about having a half-brother, because he seems to find Gregory somewhat of a burden. And while I'll admit that Gregory's naivety and optimism does cause problems sometimes, Wirt blames him for far more than he actually does. Wirt has a lot of self-esteem problems as established. He's nervous and generally seems to be unsure of himself. Because of this, he has problems facing conflict directly, usually trying to avoid things or run away, rather than facing whatever issue he has face forward, which is very unlike his little brother, who is incredibly outgoing. And I think sometimes he projects those feelings onto Greg. But as the series goes on, both Gregory and Wirt come into their own in different ways. Wirt's intelligence and quick wit, along with Greg's unending optimism, help them along the way. Wirt begins to come out of his shell, and the two seem to grow closer as the journey goes on. Where Wirt's confidence begins to grow seems to be after episode 4, Songs from the Dark Lantern, in which he's given the label of pilgrim by those in the tavern.
Oh, you're a pilgrim.
A pilgrim?
You're a traveler on a sacred journey.
You're the master of your own destiny.
For the journey that him and Greg have been on and the accomplishments they've done so far.
One time Wirt fell on a gorilla.
Wow!
And helped me find this frog. Whoa, tell us more.
The episode also sees the return of the woodsman, who Wirt is convinced is the beast or at least bad, as those in the tavern tell him,
Pilgrim, he who carries the dark lantern must be the beast.
which does instill in Wirt a distrust of the woodsman.
No, the woodsman's a good guy. He warned us of the beast and told us which direction to go to avoid him.
And now you're more lost than ever, huh?
Wirt and Gregory hear a scream and then go to find the woodsman standing over Beatrice and believe that he attacked Beatrice. So Wirt attacks the woodsman and they get Beatrice and head on their way with a horse that can talk.
Just got directions from Fred before you woke up. Meet Fred the horse.
Nice to horse your acquaintance.
You can talk?
I know I said Beatrice a lot there, please forgive me. And at the very tail end of the episode, we get to see the beast for the first time, who strikes a very obviously imposing figure against the shadows, being darker than even those behind him. He is very creepy. In the short conversation that the woodsman and the beast have, we learn a few important things. 1, that the woodsman fought the beast for the lantern. 2, that he carries it and tries to keep it lit because the beast has told him that he put his daughter's soul in the lantern and that keeping it lit keeps her alive. And 3, that the beast is seemingly following Wirt and Gregory. We also learn from the tavern keeper that the Edelwood trees are made of people who lost hope in the unknown and that the oil of them fuels the beast's lantern. The Dark Lantern is a fantastic episode, and I won't be able to do it justice in this video, so you should really watch it on your own time if you're interested. There's even more of those old cartoon references I was talking about, specifically to like the Cab Calloway type of animations that used to be done with this character called the Highwayman. It's fantastic. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the Tavern Keeper looks and sounds a lot like Betty Boop. Anyway, Wirt and Gregory have moved on. They solve problems as they go, whether they created them or not, and usually they didn't. Actually, they only really created their own problems in the first 2 episodes, and the ferry episode. Wirt, Gregory, and Beatrice have to sneak onto a ferry to get to Adelaide's house because Gregory threw away the 2 pennies he was given in the previous episode because he
got no sense. No sense at all.
We also learned that Wirt plays clarinet, and that comes up in the ferry episode, but he believes he's not very good, and spoiler alert, he actually is good.
Ow. Ow.
We also see Wirt begin to come around to Gregory in this episode, joining in on the song that he refused to sing only a few episodes earlier to show their bond growing.
Join the Adelaide Parade.
No. Come on and join the Adelaide Parade.
Oh, also George Washington, I'm referring to the frog. We find out he can sing in this episode. In fact, he can sing very beautifully.
Single soul sets his voice singing.
Unlike Wirt.
My name is Wirt, and his name is Greg.
We also learned in that episode that Wirt has a crush on a girl, but his arch nemesis,
Jason Funderburger.
see, I told you, tried to get with her. But remember, they're taking the ferry for a reason, which is to go to Adelaide's house, the good woman of the pasture who will send them home with her magic. But also remember, we were suspicious of Beatrice early on because of the way she was acting.
How about you and I ditch your brother? Maybe later.
And now she's beginning to act guilty as if she's leading them somewhere and kind of lied about it.
All right. You sound uncharacteristically wistful.
What? Sorry, just thinking.
You see, Beatrice herself isn't actually a talking bird, but a teenage girl who was turned into a talking bird.
I threw a rock at a bluebird and it cursed me and my family, and now we're all bluebirds.
Whoa. Your whole family? Is that why you're going to Adelaide?
Yeah, that was the plan. I am never going back till I can make them human again. I'd do pretty much anything.
See, the unknown isn't that weird. There aren't just magic talking bluebirds. She was a person at one point, and we're gonna ignore the talking horse from earlier.
It's the horse, your acquaintance.
You can talk?
So the person who turned Beatrice into a bluebird is actually Adelaide, and she isn't a good fair woman of the woods. She's a pale witch who is, in fact, voiced by famous Monty Python actor John Cleese. And he actually voices 2 characters in the show. The other is the rich guy from episode 5, Mad Love. I loved Monty Python growing up, so I really liked this. Honestly, the voice cast of this whole show is star-studded. Elijah Woods is Wirt. John Cleese is these 2 characters. I could go on, but that's all we're going to say for now. Anyway, if Beatrice brought a child back to Adelaide, she'd get the magic bird wing-cutting scissors, which would turn her and her family back into humans.
The arrangement was for you to bring me a child servant, and then I give you the scissors. Snip, snip your family's wings away to make them human again.
Which sounds pretty awful besides the turning back into humans part. Like, would it be painful? You're literally cutting off your wings, which are your appendages, with freaking scissors, and they don't look particularly sharp. Beatrice tries to sneak away and cut a deal with Adelaide herself to become her servant, because she's obviously friends with Wirt and Gregory now and doesn't want to see them become mindless wool zombies or something.
Once I fill their heads with wool, they'll become just like little sheep and follow my every command.
But Wirt and Gregory follow her to Adelaide's house because they see her sneaking off, and then Adelaide does this cool yarn trick which traps them, and I just said it's cool, but it's obviously bad, but it's like neat in concept, not in what she's doing. Also, she says she's apparently being commanded by the Beast, which could just be that she's crazy, but we don't know the extent of the Beast's powers either way.
I do as he commands, the voice of the night, the Beast of eternal darkness.
But Beatrice opens a window and it literally kills Adelaide because she's allergic to fresh air. The bitch just melts.
Leave now!
Whoa, jeez, she wasn't kidding.
It's French!
And Wirt and Gregory escape and leave Beatrice there, and it's sad because they obviously feel betrayed because their bird friend betrayed them.
What about Beatrice?
I shouldn't have trusted anyone.
This is one of those moments where it seems Greg is actually more insightful than Wirt, seeing that she tried to help and regretted what she was doing, but Wirt, having low self-confidence and not wanting to have trusted Beatrice in the first place, just really takes it to heart that he should not have trusted her and feels like he made a bad decision in doing that. So, as we know, Wirt had been gaining confidence from solving the different situations in the unknown on their way home. But Beatrice's betrayal destroys that built-up confidence. He feels bad for having put his trust in Beatrice, who he initially distrusted when they first met. So I imagine he feels kind of like a fool. And now him and Gregory don't have a way to get home, which they thought Adelaide would be. This starts Wirt into a spiral of depression, which makes him lose hope that him and Gregory might escape from the woods. He puts up a front at first, but this front quickly melts away at even the slightest questioning from Gregory.
Greg, I do have a plan. If you don't trust me, then you don't have to follow me.
They run into the woodsman, who is trying to help them and warn them of the beast, but they're still frightened of him because of what they learned about him and the lamp. We also see that the beast can, in fact, come out in daylight and wants to talk to the woodsman again. Wirt regains a little bit of confidence after escaping the woodsman, and almost fully regains his confidence after meeting a young girl of his age named Lorna. Lorna and Wirt quickly bond, and him and Gregory try to help her escape, assuming that she's being held captive by her very scary-looking aunt, Auntie Whispers, and that Auntie Whispers is an evil monster that eats people. But, plot twist, just because Auntie Whispers looks like a terrifying freak and eats black turtles doesn't mean she also eats people. That's called being prejudiced, guys. In fact, it turns out that Lorna is the one who's eating people because she's possessed by an evil spirit, which is frankly one of the scariest things we see in the show besides the beast. And yeah, all of the bones that were shown in the basement and like at the beginning of episode 1, those are people that Lorna's eaten, and they've kept the bones in the basement to like make her sort them, I guess as a penance or something.
You shall sort the bones of those who have been eaten here before.
Even though it's not really her fault that she's possessed by an evil spirit. Also, why keep them? That's like super bizarre and scary. They do save Lorna after it turns out that George Washington, the frog, not the president, ate the magic bell that controls the spirit, and they just tell it to leave.
Stop making Lorna do bad stuff, spirit, and also go away and don't come back.
Once freed, Lorna says that she's going to stay with her terrifying aunt, Auntie Whispers, who only goes on to remind Wirt of the bad decision he made in trusting Beatrice.
Beware my sister Adelaide. She lives in the pasture. She must not be trusted.
This episode is like kind of weird to me because I always wondered why Auntie Whispers didn't just use the bell in the way that Wirt and Gregory did. It makes me think that she either didn't want to because she didn't want Lorna to leave, which means that she let people get devoured out of pure selfishness, or because of how the unknown works, she just didn't think to do that. She didn't think that would work. Either way, it's kind of like, damn. That or she came along at some point and Lorna had already devoured a bunch of people, which is also pretty scary. But anyway, Wirt and Gregory depart, and Wirt begins to revert to his sullen state. In fact, even feeling worse than he did because he thought he'd made a connection again, and then it's dashed. Wirt's hopelessness only grows as we move into the next episode, which we learned in episode 1 is a bad thing that you don't want to let happen. Before the episode ends, we do get to see an exchange between the woodsman and the beast once more, the beast chastising the woodsman for almost ruining his plans.
Your play could have cost us both. Don't you care about your daughter's soul?
There has to be another way.
There's only me. There is only my way. There is only the forest, and there is only surrender.
By the beginning of the next episode, Wirt has lost all hope. He basically gives up, like, completely, blaming the entire situation on Gregory and telling him that he has to fix things.
Do you even know why we got lost in the first place? It's because you were goofing around and getting into trouble like you always do.
Really? It was all my fault?
And he's going to go to sleep. Signs of depression if I've ever seen them, and I have because I look in the mirror pretty frequently. Gregory immediately takes charge, but decides to nap with Wirt first to keep his energy up. Gregory then has a hallucinogenic dream in which he lives out a cartoon from the early 20th century. I like this episode a lot because it reminds me of Nemo in Dreamland. After saving Cloud City, which is the place he hallucinates, or seemingly hallucinates, it might be real, Gregory is granted a wish by the magic fairy queen, a la very similar to the Wizard of Oz. Of course, Gregory, being the badass little guy that he is, wishes for him and Wirt to go home. But the fairy queen tells him that Wirt's already been claimed by the beast, that he can't go on because of that.
See how the edelwood grows around him? The beast has claimed him already.
So in an incredible and badass act of selflessness, Gregory wishes to trade places with Wirt. Either Gregory can't sense the danger, or he just doesn't care about the danger because he loves his brother that much. And I think it's the latter. Good guy Greg. Before moving on, I want to talk about this dream sequence because I've always wondered if it is real or some trick played by the beast. Gregory obviously switched places with Wirt, which is really interesting. This leads me to believe that the dream was real, and so was the wish, because the beast probably could have just taken them both, unless it really only can take those who lose hope. It's like one of those magical, feeling-y rules type monsters. It's hard to decide really, but I like to think that Gregory's decision to make that wish is as impactful as it is. I mean, let's be real, even if the wish isn't real, he basically made a deal with the beast to trade his own life for his brother's to save him, and that's huge.
I'm sorry I got us lost, Wirt.
There's much to be done.
And then you'll show us the way home, right?
Of course. We made a promise, didn't we?
Gregory, of course, goes off with the beast, and Wirt soon awakens, realizing that Gregory is gone and that he was being kind of a turd.
Greg, what did I do? Greg! Greg!
He looks for Gregory in a panic, but ends up falling into a frozen lake, only to be saved by Beatrice and the fishing fish. Off topic, but when I was a kid, I got a Popeyes bag that had a chicken eating chicken on it, and this reminds me of that. Anyway, it turns out that Beatrice isn't so bad after all. She was just a bird in a hard situation and made some crappy choices. Haven't we all? Wirt passes out after being rescued, and we move on to episode 9, Into the Unknown. Or really, Out of the Unknown. You see, this is the episode that tells us Wirt and Gregory's backstory, how they ended up in the unknown.
Into the unknown.
Turns out they're both modern kids from the modern world, and it happens to be Halloween. Wirt is in his room ruminating on the fact that he's made a tape and is scared to give it to a girl. He gives up, destroys the tape, but then his confidence comes back. He winds it back in, makes a weird-looking gnome-like costume, which we didn't really question early on because he was in this, like, fantasy setting, but now it's like, okay, what are you supposed to be, dude? I mean, look, it's kind of a swaggy outfit, but I'm still like, are you like a gnome poet? I mean, he does like poetry, so maybe that's it. He's a gnome poet. Wirt heads off into the night to give Sarah the tape, and what follows is a series of events that aren't so bad, but are very awkward, and Wirt is also really good at catastrophizing. To make a long story short, Greg tries to help Wirt by giving the tape to Sarah, but some classmates of theirs grab it first. Upon hearing that Jason Funderburker is planning on asking Sarah out, Wirt leaves in defeat without getting the tape back, and then remembers that the classmates still have it. They end up putting the tape in Sarah's jacket pocket, and Wirt becomes terrified of her hearing it because it contains...
That tape got poetry and clarinet on it, Greg. Poetry and clarinet!
They try to get it back, but fail many times. Along the way, we also see that Wirt, while being low in confidence, is actually pretty well liked by his peers.
I don't know what he said, but it wasn't true.
Oh, hey, Wirt, how's it going?
Yeah.
We've seen in The Unknown why that probably is, because he's actually quite a smart and capable person when he puts his mind to it. Also, Jason Funderburker is nowhere near as devious as Wirt makes him out to be. He is in fact a dweeb, and the only reason Wirt probably dislikes him is because he also has a crush on Sarah and has a little bit more confidence than he does. After many failed attempts of getting the tape back, they end up hanging out in a graveyard, and a cop shows up. So obviously they run, because that's something when you're in a group and a cop shows up, you go scatter, because no one wants to be the one to get caught. Wirt and Gregory end up climbing over a garden wall. But before they jump to the other side, Wirt happens to see Sarah find the tape in her pocket, and to his horror, Funderburker says,
"Let's go listen to it."
Oh my god, Wirt's fears have been validated, except probably not, because most of his peers like him, and that includes Sarah. This leads to Wirt telling off Gregory when they've jumped to the other side, blaming him for most of his problems, not just this tape one, and saying that Greg and his stepfather ruined his life.
Once again, you ruined my life.
Then they're almost hit by a train, but dodge out of the way and roll down a hill and fall into a river below. And then the screen fades to black. And that's how they got into the unknown. Crazy, huh? A few things before we talk about the end of the episode. Firstly, the train that we hear at the beginning of every episode after the title card, yeah, that was a reference to this train. And an earlier version of the show featured them riding a train into the unknown, but I'm pretty sure it's referencing this train because it's the actual train that instigates the story. And in that version, the unknown is actually specifically the afterlife, which a lot of people think the unknown still is in this version, but that version is very different from this, and we'll talk about that later. Not only that, but we find out that Wirt and Gregory aren't actually modern kids, which has been subtly referenced a few times throughout the series. First, all the way back in episode 2, in which Wirt mentions looking for a phone.
I'm looking for a phone. I'm sorry.
Then in episode 4, when Wirt is called a pilgrim, and he calls them...
I know what you are. You're a pilgrim.
What, like the guys who eat turkey and cranberry sauce?
No.
Which, you know, if he was from the time the unknown is set in, whatever time that may be, it's definitely not there present. He'd probably just know what a pilgrim was, or the fact that almost everyone around him is dressed like them. He was also surprised at how cheap the ferry was, costing only 2 cents.
If we're going to Adelaide's, we need 2 cents.
2 cents? Only 2 cents?
Yeah, we need 2 pennies to take the ferry to Adelaide's pasture.
And Gregory also named his frog George Washington at one point for a little bit.
What's with George Washington being naked?
What?
A reference to the first president of the United States. It's cool that there's just subtle little things like this sprinkled all throughout the show, and I bet there's even others that I missed, so comment them below if you know any. I'd also say that Wirt treats Gregory really bad in this episode, even compared to the rest of the series, and we do get some framing for why that is. Wirt seems to blame Gregory and his stepfather for a lot of his life's problems, even if from what we can see in the series, they're not causing him problems. It seems like he just puts the blame on his problems on other people. Yes, Gregory can be a bit of a nuisance at times. He can even do things people don't want him to, but he's really just doing his best, and he's very optimistic and nice. We'll talk more on that later, but for now, we return to the present. Wirt wakes up in a tree with Beatrice's family, who politely feed him dirt. Wirt thanks them for their hospitality, eats a little bit more dirt, and leaves, promising to tell Beatrice that they love her. Wirt disappears into the snow, searching for his brother with their family frog in hand. This brings us to the final episode of the show. Wirt and Beatrice meet to search for Gregory, who is trying to complete impossible tasks being given to him by the Beast. He's managed to complete 2, finding a golden comb and a silver thread, but the final one, putting the sun in a cup, is more than likely actually impossible. But Gregory still tries because, as Gregory says,
Wirt, you can do anything if you set your mind to it.
Gregory lays down while he waits for the sun to go into the cup, and later the woodsman arrives, and the Beast informs him that Gregory will burn nicely in the lantern. We see Gregory with the beginnings of an Edelwood tree growing around him. And yes, this is our confirmation that the Edelwood trees are people who died or lost hope in the forest. We've been told it a few times, but this is like very literal. The woodsman enters a battle with the Beast, though really it looks like the Beast is just flawlessly dodging every blow the woodsman throws at him like he's a Dark Souls speedrunner. What soon follows after this is the true final confrontation with the antagonist, the Beast. Wirt finds the woodsman's lantern, and with it spots Gregory covered in the growing Edelwood. Wirt and Beatrice begin to help Gregory, Wirt apologizing, having realized how badly he was treating his brother all along. Gregory, having kind of given up himself, pleads for Wirt to go back and save himself, and to take his Rock Fact Rock back to Old Lady Daniels, because he had in fact stolen it.
I stole it from Mrs. Daniels' garden. I'm a stealer.
This could be why he made the "I have no sense" comment all the way back in episode 5, Mad Love. That, or he's just goofy like that. It could be either one. The Beast returns after wearing out the woodsman. That, or knocking him out. He just kind of falls over. Wirt turns to face the Beast. The Beast demands Wirt give him the lantern, but Wirt refuses. Then the Beast tells Wirt that Gregory is a lost cause. He's been taken by him in the woods, and that he can put Gregory's soul in the lantern like the woodsman's daughter. And he must take up the woodsman's place of feeding the lantern.
Take on the task of lantern bearer, or watch your brother perish.
Wirt, for a moment, gives up and does as the Beast says, only to immediately realize how stupid that is.
Wait, that's dumb.
What?
Realizing that the beast really wants to keep the lantern lit for some reason.
Almost like your soul is in this lantern.
What follows is the beast's final attempt to intimidate and scare Wirt, and Wirt realizing that the lantern really is the beast's life force because of its reaction. With this realization, Wirt is able to put fear into the heart of the beast itself. He gives the lantern back to the woodsman and returns to his brother because he has to get home. The beast isn't really his problem. Wirt gives Beatrice the scissors to save her family. He took them earlier because he was kind of mad at her, which, fair, but hey, everything works out.
Oh, you wonderful mistake of nature.
The beast, in a final Hail Mary, attempts to tell the woodsman to kill Wirt and Gregory and use the lantern to keep his daughter alive. But the woodsman now knows that his daughter's soul was never in the lantern. He turns to the beast, and we see it for the first time in its true form. The beast pleads, it attempts to fool him one more time, but the woodsman now knows the truth, and blows out the lantern, ending the beast. Beatrice and Wirt say their goodbyes.
Goodbye, Beatrice.
Goodbye, Wirt.
And Wirt awakens in the real world, in the river. He drags himself, Gregory, and Jason Funderburker, the frog, not the guy, out of the river, and they're saved by their friends and helpful emergency service workers. Once back at a hospital, Wirt resolves to listen to the tape with Sarah after waking up, but only after they've built up to it.
Maybe we can listen to this.
You can listen to it at my house. Maybe we should listen to some other tapes first.
While he was asleep, Gregory told everyone about the stories of what happened to them in the unknown, and of course they probably didn't believe him. But before the camera zooms out, we see Greg shake Jason Funderburker the frog, and we see the faint glow of the magic bell in its stomach from episode 7. The camera zooms out of the hospital as the narrator speaks.
And yet, over the garden wall.
We then see the different people of the unknown, in a much better state than they were before Wirt and Gregory had graced their land, ending with Beatrice, now in her human form again, having saved her family. We also see, oh, would you look at that? The abandoned mill from episode 1 was her family's home. It's all put up together in a nice bow. I've been watching this show for literally years, and I just made that connection on these recent rewatches, a week or two ago. And I didn't even figure it out from the ending. I was rewatching episode 1 and saw that the house was full of bird statues, and I was like, oh snap, is that making it seem like the abandoned house was actually Beatrice's? And I was right. Years later, but yeah. This is how the show ends. But I still think there's a lot left to discuss, don't you? So, let's do that now. Over the Garden Wall as a story is simple on its face, but is steeped in a lot of symbolism. Not just symbolism, but also like a million different inspirations that also lace the story with different ideas of what is going on. As I said all the way back at the beginning of the video, the show is basically a modern fairy tale, but it's like a bunch of modern fairy tales all stuck together into one big narrative. The show is chock full of fairy tale-isms, from the woodsman tricked into doing a task by false beliefs, to Wirt and Gregory's overall story, to kids lost in the woods, Adelaide's magic scissors, to the magic bell of Auntie Whispers, talking animals that assist the boys, strange people in strange lands, etc., etc. Over the Garden Wall is basically a modern Brothers Grimm style fairy tale. I mean, Beatrice is essentially the frog prince in need of the brothers' help to save herself and her family, but of course, like the more classical fairy tales, she ends up having a darker motive. Greg himself even kind of alludes to his awareness that they're in a fairy tale when immediately asking Beatrice if she'll grant him a wish for saving her.
I'll think of my wish later.
In fact, speaking of darker narratives, Patrick McHale wanted the show to be even darker than we got in the final product. Originally, there was going to be a skinless witch who kidnapped children while they slept, and a man named Mr. Whittles who killed children and used their bones to make carvings. Pretty gruesome stuff, to be honest. And also, like fairy tales, the show teaches a lot of lessons, and the overall story does too, from being confident in yourself, being optimistic, not blaming others for your problems, and more, and we'll talk a bit more on that later. And I think the fairy tale aspects of the show are why the show has such a dreamlike quality to it as well. Each episode is its own little adventure, and each place feels similar but also entirely unique to the previous. From a village of the dead celebrating the harvest to a steamboat ferry for wealthy frogs in a Louisiana style. Wirt and Gregory arrive at the start not knowing how they got there, and leave for parts unknown by the end of each episode, and this pattern repeats every episode. We know they leave, but we don't know how they got to where they're going, and this is a very common thing in dreams. You flow in and out of different places and situations, feeling as if they are connected, but not really knowing how you got from one place to another. We know they can go to places they need to, as Beatrice, Wirt, and Greg all plan to go to the ferry and eventually arrive there. But we don't know how they got there, because by the end of episode 5, they're still at the Quincy Mansion, and when episode 6 starts, they're already on the ferry. We don't get to see them travel there. This could just, of course, be taken as good TV pacing, because it is. The way Over the Garden Wall does it makes it more interesting, especially by the end when we know the full context of how Wirt and Gregory got into the unknown. Not only that, but they could have shown Wirt and Gregory traveling between places in like longer bits. They could have shown us how connected the unknown is, but they don't. It's left up to our imagination. They leave places and arrive at other places. The scenery and weather and so many things change as they go between these places, sometimes incredibly suddenly, like at the end. That's another fantastically interesting part of the show, how it goes from fall to winter so quickly within the unknown, not to mention the amount of days they spend there and the fact that when they come back to their own world, it's not even probably been like a few minutes. Towards the end, when it begins to snow, you begin to wonder if the unknown is unattached from our own time, or if the weather is being brought on by someone like Wirt, who isn't from the unknown, feeling that hopelessness, because, you know, in older times, the winter was a time of strife and at times hopelessness, especially if you didn't have a warm place to shelter up. All of this leads us into a discussion of what the unknown really is. This is a big topic that people like to talk about when they talk about Over the Garden Wall. What is the unknown? Is it a dream? Is it purgatory? Is it like a place between life and death? I personally don't think it's as simple as any one of those things. Patrick McHale himself in interviews has said that almost anyone's interpretation is a good one, that he accepts any of them, which, you know, some people would say is a cop-out, but I kind of get what he's doing. Like I said not too long ago, Over the Garden Wall is a very dreamlike series. It has a lot of roots in fairy tales and storybooks, and like in those different things, a lot of magical stuff can happen. The unknown itself is a magical and mysterious place, seemingly unbound to time and space as we know it, yet holding a sort of physical existence as well as some sort of culture. It feels very early American, and of course this is an artistic choice, but visuals are just as important to a visual story as the story itself. My personal opinion is that Wirt and Gregory really did go to the unknown, that the unknown is a physical space, but it doesn't really work in the way that we think our world to work. It's part dream, part reality, a melding of both the subconscious and conscious, different places in different times, combined by different things, amalgamated into this one thing called the unknown, dreams and memories and stories and things that really did happen or are happening in this weird place. And yes, I would be amiss not to point out that there is a bit of symbolism about death, the idea of hopelessness with the beast, the fact that Wirt and Gregory literally fell into a river and seemingly almost drowned. And that means the unknown could be a place between life and death, or at least that's part of what it is, because it seems to be a lot of things. There are people there who are already dead, who celebrate the harvest. There are people there who become possessed by evil spirits. People have died there. Apparently, the woodsman's wife died while they were living there, and people live out their full lives there. That makes me even wonder, like, how people end up in the unknown. Are they born there? Do they wander in like Wirt and Gregory and just decide to stay? It's all really interesting. So, yes, I think that the unknown is a real physical place. Maybe it's a place you do go from having a near-death experience. Or maybe that river really does take you somewhere. They fell into like a pocket to another dimension or something more magical, you know? They flow downstream, but not just from a physical place, but to a different relative reality. A story I liked a lot as a kid and that me and my brother got read a lot is called Where the Wild Things Are. In it, a kid named Max is sent to his room with no supper after acting up, and while there, a magical forest grows up in his room, and he travels into that forest to the place where the wild things are. When I think of Over the Garden Wall, I think of this book as well. Both Wirt and Gregory, as well as Max, all have things they need to learn, and a magical thing comes along and helps them learn it. We also saw that Beatrice and her family were returned to normal, that the woodsman got his daughter back, and that Winter in fact stayed in the unknown, so that's just kind of how it was for that place. Unlike Where the Wild Things Are, though, the unknown in Over the Garden Wall seemed to need Wirt and Gregory just as much as they needed it. Wirt and Gregory were pilgrims from a different land, and their intrusion into this strange world helps it, and in that it helps them too. They figure things out about themselves while bringing their outside-of-the-box thinking into this strange place. The unknown helps Wirt appreciate life, gain self-confidence, and realize that he loves his little brother and that he should care about him more, and the unknown helps Gregory realize that stealing is bad, I guess. Gregory was just kind of in it for the fun, and he did some pretty good stuff along the way. He's a real lad. But back to the symbolism. As I said earlier, Over the Garden Wall does have a lot of symbolism based around death. And I like that because it doesn't paint death as an inherently bad thing. An example of that is the dead folks in episode 2. They aren't really sad. If anything, they're coming back to celebrate the harvest. That in itself is interesting because harvests are usually a celebration of life. It's the land coming back to life to bring food, to give you nutrients to survive in the world, and these dead people are celebrating it. And why not? I mean, that's part of the cycle of living, being alive and then dying. The implication that Wirt and Gregory will someday join them while painted as dark,
oh well, you'll join us someday,
isn't inherently bad either. I mean, yes, we as humans are naturally afraid of death. I'm afraid of death, so it makes sense, but death is also just a part of life. Banging on that drum just a little bit more, the show even kind of does the transition of the harvest to winter. The harvest is a time that usually represents a celebration of life and the idea of living, survival, while the winter is commonly associated with death. Plants die, it gets darker, it's cold, and harder to survive. Having said all that, death isn't shown to be just neutral in the show either. It's also shown to be bad under certain circumstances as well. People in the unknown don't want to die, just like Wirt and Gregory. And they can, if the large amount of bones in Auntie Whisper's basement is anything showing of it. This also brings us to the Beast, the main antagonist of the show. Besides being a larger fairy tale style antagonist, a monster whose sole want is to preserve itself and must do so through devilish but magically weird means, the Beast is also pretty starkly representing of something related to death and human emotions. That something to me is hopelessness. It's literally what the Beast needs to turn people into Edelwood trees. If they lose hope, the Beast can take them, as we see with Wirt and Gregory at different points. He literally feeds on people's loss of hope and then eventually their death. In that, a loss of hope can be seen as a form of death. Giving up becomes equivalent to death. This becomes even more solidified to me when we see that the Beast himself is made up of the hard faces of the Edelwood trees that he needs for his life force. In a more literal sense, he could be a manifestation of loss and hope, or anguish. Those who get lost in the unknown and sadly perished, rather than finding their way home, are deciding to stay, and that makes up what he is. Literally, those horrible emotions of people dying in ways they don't want to, creating a monster that ironically wants to continue to subjugate others to keep itself alive by creating those emotions. But that's just me having fun speculating where he could have come from. Early on, his design and name was Old Scratch, which is a pseudonym for the devil, so the Beast really could just be a representation of evil who feeds on some of the worst emotions that humans can experience, and one of the worst things that can happen to you, which is losing hope and dying in the woods. Now, this brings me to the black turtles, since I know they'll be brought up by people in the comments, and my guess is that they're a species that is born of the Edelwood or connected to them in some way. They don't seem inherently evil, and early on we just know that they can transform dogs into monsters, but later when we learn that the Edelwoods and their oil is connected to the Beast, and that we see the Beast has the same colored eyes as the dog did, we can kind of make a triangle of realization that the turtles are connected to the Edelwood, and the Edelwood is connected to the Beast, so they all must be connected to each other in some way. Like I said earlier, I don't think that they're inherently evil or anything like that. I think they're probably born of the Edelwood or come from the oil or something, and they still do exist even after the Beast is gone. In fact, maybe the Beast is created because of those turtles. We don't really know. I'll talk more on the turtles later, but for now, fun fact. The turtle was added simply to give the dog something to eat in episode 1 so it would transform, because nearing the end of production, they made a bunch of changes, which I'll talk about later. So those are my thoughts on the Beast. And the Beast, as an antagonist, lines up perfectly against Wirt, someone who started out with a big lack of confidence in himself and was liable to fall victim to that lack of hope that the Beast needs to feed on. If Wirt had gone in alone to the unknown, he might have perished. It was Gregory's unending optimism that ended up saving Wirt, making him realize how important his brother really is to him. That brings us finally to Beatrice and the Woodsman. The Woodsman's story is, in my opinion, simply about love and grief and what it can do to you and how it can blind you to things around you. The possible loss of the Woodsman's daughter nearly drives him mad, and so he is easily swayed to do the Beast's bidding with the hope that it would keep his daughter alive. Of course, this is basically a deal with the devil, and by the end we know that the Beast lied. This could be seen as the idea that hopelessness, or the dark part of you, lies to you in dark times, but I could be reaching a little bit when saying that, but that's kind of what it seems to me. Beatrice's story seems to say, like, hey, be less of a jerk. It seems that's what might have gotten her and her family turned into bluebirds in the first place, but we don't really know. She could have been lying about throwing a rock at a bird and being transformed into a bluebird by the bird, because we know Adelaide had the scissors and all that. But anyway, Beatrice is resourceful and reliable when she needs to be, and towards the end is even willing to sacrifice herself instead of bringing someone else to Adelaide to save her families and others. In that, I think she's likable, and it's nice to see her arc fulfilled by the end. So with all that in mind, what do I think Over the Garden Wall is all about? Death, dreams, life, frogs, the fall, a little bit of everything for everybody. And I know a lot of people focus on the lyrics of the songs in the show, especially those final lines.
Dancing in a swirl of golden memories, the loveliest lies of all.
To say that it might have all just been a dream, that it wasn't real, but personally, I think the unknown really happened. As I said earlier, like a fairy tale or Where the Wild Things Are, they drifted to someplace far from their own that doesn't work like our world does, and there they experience those things. Things that are history but present, allegorical but physical, life but death, dreams but reality. And isn't that just beautiful? So if you've made it this far, I think you've waited long enough. If you're wondering how Over the Garden Wall was inspired by Breaking Bad, it was actually inspired in the way that Breaking Bad was written and structured. While writing Over the Garden Wall, Patrick Macleod became worried about the story not fitting together well or being paced well. He was watching Breaking Bad when taking breaks from the stresses of production, and it inspired him to go with the flow a bit more when writing. Here's the quote. I think the final season of Breaking Bad was airing around the time that we were halfway through our writing process, and I was catching up on the show to get my mind off of the daily stresses of production. As I watched the show, I started to realize that they weren't really setting up huge plot points so that they could pay them off later. It felt more organic. It felt like they were writing whatever felt right in the moment for the show and for the characters. Whatever was exciting or interesting or satisfying. I realized you can write whatever you want. So I stopped stressing so hard about trying to structure everything the right way, and I finally let the instincts kick in. It's much better to let the story and characters live and breathe. So yeah, part of that dreamlike nature of the show came from Breaking Bad, and probably some of people's favorite episodes are a result of that lax writing style, which I think is really, really rad. The biggest change that came of this, though, was putting the first episode, which was originally the origin of them getting lost in the unknown, as the penultimate 9th episode, which I think is a fantastic change. Changes like that are also where the black turtles came from. After changing the oil of the Edelwoods from being sticky, they had to have the dog eat something to transform it, and chose a turtle. They didn't really have a reason for picking a turtle, so they see the turtles as an imperfection in the quilt of the story they made. Speaking of the turtles, Patrick Macleod also put an interesting anecdote in the Art of the Over the Garden Wall book about the turtles and Auntie Whisper specifically. She looks the way she does because she eats the turtles. I mean, we can make that assumption ourselves, but Pat called her a sort of sin eater, which were people who ate foods that held people's sins in the past. So she is in essence getting rid of something bad that doesn't belong in the world, as Pat McHale put it. I still don't think the turtles are evil, but with that in mind, they could be considered an invasive species. To add to that before we finish up, a lot of this information on the making of Over the Garden Wall came from that art book, which is stuffed to the gills with information on the show. Something interesting is the original premise was Wirt and Gregory searching for the Tome of the Unknown, a book with everything ever forgotten in it. I think it went through a few iterations before it became the series that we know today, but you can actually still find the original short film from 2013 that was kind of based off this premise and would eventually lead to the full miniseries we have today. The short is also called The Tome of the Unknown, and you can find it on YouTube. It's a really wholesome and fun little short, and it's funny because Patrick McHale wanted to make something scarier and was a bit disappointed with how wholesome the Tome of the Unknown short ended up being. About a guitar-playing vegetable man who falls in love, but he eventually got his wish when the final series was made. As I said earlier, that original iteration, or one of the earlier iterations, was going to be 18 episodes long and also featured a segment where Wirt and Gregory were going to be turned into animals, but that was obviously cut. But I'm actually really happy with what we got in the miniseries the way it is. I think it's perfect, it's a cult classic, and I'm glad that we got what we got. Over the Garden Wall is a truly unique piece of media that still holds up today, and I really don't think we've actually gotten much like it since then. Patrick McHale is apparently working on a spiritual successor to it, a la that interview I've been talking about throughout the video, so I am looking forward to that, and I hope you are too. The 10th anniversary is coming up on November 3rd, as I said at the start, and we are apparently getting a special stop-motion animation in honor of that as well, which is really neat. And I also recently downloaded the comics to read, and I'm going to check those out. I wanted to include those in this video, especially the ones that were written by Pat McHale, because people consider those canon to the series, but this video is long enough as it is, and I want to get it out, hopefully, like, right before October ends, so maybe I'll make another video on the comics in the future if people want me to. If you've been looking forward to this video, or if you're watching my channel for the first time, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments, give me a like, subscribe. I hope this video was worth your time, and I appreciate you watching all the way to this point. This is actually surprisingly one of my more short videos recently, but yeah. Thank you to all of my lovely Patreon members and my YouTube channel members. On YouTube, we've got Alexander Delarge, Froiner, Ren, and Ashbob5000. And on Patreon, I want to give a shout out to Southbridge, Cade Kirk, and Squiddy LaFemme. And also thank you to everyone who tuned in to my Silent Hill 2 remake streams. I had a lot of fun. I want to stream more soon. In fact, I'm probably going to stream one of the days while working on this video before it releases. We'll see. I mean, if you're watching this now, that's already happened in the past. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you to the people who donated during those streams, specifically Ren and Squiddy LaFemme. Thank you guys so much for donating. It means a lot to me. Also, thank you to Freeced for allowing me to use their cover of Into the Unknown. I will have their Twitter or their Blue Sky linked below. Having said all that, happy Halloween. I'm Ghost on Holiday. Thank you for letting me haunt your digital devices during this spooky season, and remember...
You know, pumpkins are actually flying out of your ass.